drive, especially if you're going to be playing like future direct storage games, could make a significant difference, so definitely worth looking into this. But the chip that we're going to be using with this is the Ryzen 6-core 5500, and this is a little bit of a choice that you're going to have to make really between Intel and AMD, because if you go for the Intel option, which would be the same sort of price, the 12100F, that will actually perform better in a fair few games, but it's only a 4-core chip, whereas this one is a 6-core. So it's going to vary, I think, depending on the game that you're going to play and what you use your PC for. But ultimately, I personally probably go for whatever's cheaper and then sort of upgrade it at a later date. Neither of these chips are necessarily ones you're going to want to keep for years and years. But obviously it depends on how much money you want to throw at PC gaming. Do be aware, oh no, we do. I was going to say do be aware that most B550 boards don't actually have 3.1 header for cases, but this one does, which is nice to see. The Hellcrack has 2 USB-A 2.0 and then 1 USB-A 3.0. So to be honest, actually for most people, just using like receivers and things, that's probably better than just having like 2 and a Type-C, but it depends again what you're going to use your PC for. Grab the I/O shield from within, seal it back up again, pick up your motherboard once more, and then just gently lay this down on the box ready for construction. We can then crack open our CPU box. This one does come with a cooler as well. This is obviously going to save us a whole bunch of money, but you just gently line this up, get the gold arrow to line up with this little like circular ball on this motherboard. So the Ryzen text is facing towards the I/O on the back of your motherboard. Gently line it up so that it kind of falls in place, and then just lower this lever back down. But then you can proceed to take the cooler out of the box, and this is a screw down one, so you will need to remove the default AM4 mounting hardware just by taking these 4 screws out with a standard Phillips crosshead screwdriver. Then you can pick up your cooler, gently line this up with those holes, then just screw it down in a cross pattern so you're not putting excess force on the socket. And if you sort of do one of the screws up all the way, then you'll almost certainly find that your cooler's sort of peeing off in one direction, and then you can't actually screw it down anyway. Once you've done that, you just want to grab this little fan cable and then find where it says CPU fan, and just gently plop this over the top, and this will regulate the speed of the fan so it's only spinning up when there's action going on, and the rest of the time the PC will be a little bit quiet. Once you've got that screwed down, you will need to grab some memory or some RAM. This is a 16GB kit. It's running at 3600 MHz. It's DDR4. This is actually one that is optimized for Ryzen. It's not particularly expensive. I think depending on where and when you get it, around about 35 to 40 pounds here in the UK, and probably very similar in US money. But lovely editor Carl will leave all the points down below for us because he's a good egg. And to install this, very straightforward, just open up slots 2 and 4. Don't put them directly next to each other unless you've got 4 DIMMs, because you'll be running in what we call single channel mode and you actually lose speed and thus performance. You just line up the groove with the one that's on the motherboard, and then give it a good push down, and then do the same with the other DIMM. If you're not sure whether it's actually plugged in, by the way, just make sure these little notches are all lined up, because quite often if it's not in properly, it will look like this, and this could actually cause the whole PC not to boot, which would be very sad indeed. And then the last thing that we need to do before we can actually put this inside our chassis is, of course, to install some storage, as this is what's going to have our OS and actually have all of our lovely games. This one is from Silicon Power. I believe this is a Gen 4 drive actually, and it certainly offers very good value for money. But as I always say with storage, have a look at sales and make sure you're buying the one that offers the best sort of value for the speed at the time of checkout, because it does vary quite a lot. But I imagine this Silicon Power one will just be cheap a lot of the time. But I'll leave links to everything, by the way, listed down below if you do want to build either this or something similar for yourself, your partner, your child, your gran. The actual installation process is ridiculously simple. Just take this little cover off the top. This is what we call the SSD heatsink. You're going to want to make sure you do use this top slot though, even if you have others on the motherboard like this one. This is the one that gives you the full rated PCI Gen 4 speed. And if you don't use it and use a Gen 4 drive, then you are literally leaving performance on the table. Another thing to make sure you do, and I guarantee loads of people have not done this and are watching this going, oh, it's to remove this little like protective cover on the heat pad itself, because if you don't take that off, it won't be working properly, so your SSD will get hotter than it needs to be. Place the screw and then repeat with the other side. To actually get this installed, all we need to do is grab our case. We'll lay this down flat. Then, if you haven't already, do make sure you do have the I/O shield out of your motherboard box. There's not always one of these, to be fair. You can tell because if you have like a plate on the end of this, then it's already like pre-attached. But if you're using a more budget-friendly board like we are here today, you'll get one of these old school plates that you need to push in at the back of your chassis. You then want to have a look at these things that we call standoffs and see if they're already installed. And they've got 6 here, but the ones that say A also need to be inserted. So they've provided these in the bag that comes with the case. They look a little bit like this, and they're very easy to install. You just screw into the hole. And if you do have some pliers lying around, I would highly advise that you do tighten them up, because what can happen is when you use your PC for years to come and then you want to upgrade the motherboard, you find that they can get stuck on the other side of the motherboard where they weren't actually inserted all of the way. Once you have done that, it is literally then just a case of grabbing your motherboard, lining it up with that I/O shield, and then just giving it a slight push down so that it kind of finds the standoff holes. Then you just need to grab your little wooden screws that again come with the case, and then just get this safe and secure. Once everything's safe and secure, you can then stand it back up and start to admire your work. And because this is, as I say, more of a budget-friendly gaming PC, the good news is there's not actually much left to do. Like CPU coolers and things usually take ages, adding extra fans, plugging things in, but there's not too much to do here. Obviously 2 components to go, but before you put those in, I'd always recommend plugging these cables in. But just get these ready by routing them through to the other side of your board, and then you can start plugging them in. So USB 3 is right down here at the bottom, look, just like this. Directly next to that is your USB 2. The bottom right, you'll find your power switch. And then all the way to the bottom left, you have your HD audio. And at this point, it's now time to actually get your graphics card installed. So the best way of doing this is to watch this video first, realize that you have these like bendy out pitai finger cover things, and you want to take these out before you put your motherboard in, because you can risk damaging your motherboard if you take these out and they can like take things off your board. I seem to make this mistake every time because higher end cases have covers that are removable, so you don't have to do this. Yeah, okay, it's okay on this motherboard because there aren't any clearance issues, to be fair, but I would advise doing it before you actually put your board in. These things literally just kind of tear out, and the best way of doing this is just to move it around a few times until it comes off naturally rather than yanking it. Then you can pick up your GeForce RTX 4060 graphics card. It's like the holy grail. It comes in an anti-static bag, which is always really noisy. And you then be greeted with your GPU. And obviously different manufacturers design it slightly differently. I think there's an MSI one actually in the AWD PC, but as I say, this one's palette. I'd probably just go for the cheapest one if I'm honest, unless you've got your eye on something specific, or there's sales and things. But you just want to line up this little groove here with the ones that's on the motherboard, then it should gently press down into position. And to get it safe and secure, you do need to use the hex screws that come with your case just to fit this down so it's kind of tied to the chassis. And as you can see, we really are now making fantastic progress. The last piece of the puzzle is the power supply. This one is also from MSI. It's one of the more entry-level ones. It's not going to be the most fantastic spec thing in the world, but it still is rated bronze for efficiency, so you know, it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to actually run this thing. It's 650 watts as well, so it's got plenty of upgradability. So if you do want to go for like a higher end GPU at a later date, then that should be okay, but it always depends on the exact specification of the card that you're going for, what CPU you're going to be using, all of these things. The only other real thing to note though is that this is what we call a non-modular power supply. So to save money, all of these cables are actually pre-routed into the power supply, which is great because it does save yourself, well, some money, but obviously when it comes to cable management, it's not going to look as pretty because all of these cables do need to be hidden somewhere in your chassis, whereas on like a higher end one, they would just live in this box and they wouldn't be inside your PC case. But if you're not that fussed, it's not really the end of the world. You're just going to have to make sure you find somewhere to store them. In order for this to actually fit inside a chassis though, make sure you grab the power supply with the fan facing downwards so it can actually breathe through
the new suit is faster and more mobile.
Back.
By getting close to the...
There we go. Before securing into place with more place. It's then just a case of untangling this mess. You'll find these things that we call SATA connections that are used for 2.5 and larger hard drives, but can also be used for RGB hubs and things. And I believe that is what we have here for these RGB fans. So, as I say, tear through the mess and then just get the fans connected. Then you can stow all of the slack in that hard drive cage out of sight and out of mind. Grab the one that says CPU on the side of it and then feed this through this little hole at the top. This huge one that we call the ATX feeds in at the top left. And then finally, we have these ones that say PCIe that are used for our graphics card. These, depending on the case, can either feed sort of down, under, and up, or in this instance, we're just going to go through the side here. Then we can give this a spin round.
You're safe now.
And then we can start plugging everything in. So we'll start with our graphics card.
Tell me you're going to find Scarecrow.
8-pin that connects in the middle of the GPU. Push it until it clicks. Then we can grab our ATX and plug this in at the top right of the board. Once again, fair bit of force till it clicks. Feed the slack through to the other side to keep it nice and neat. And then I think the very last thing we need to do is this 8-pin at the top that we call CPU power. This just gently lines up. It is a little bit fiddly, but once it's in, and then that should be our gaming PC complete. We'll be testing it in just a second, but just to show you what the rear of the PC looks like, you can do a little bit of cable management just by sort of tucking cables into various different nooks and crannies. You can use cable ties that you do actually get in the bag as well. And you have these tie-down points, but you've not got too much in here, so
I need to use both antennas to identify the micro and radio
very
wave
much
frequencies
the
across
side panel
Gotham.
test. I've used the magic
If
of
I can
editing
find
to
both
put
frequencies
one
at the same
cable tie down
location,
here.
I'll
As
know
long as this
where
goes
Scarecrow
on,
is
I'll
manufacturing
be
his
happy.
toxin.
So screw that in, and then that, I now think, is our completed gaming PC. But will it work? I really hope so. So we've grabbed ourselves a monitor, keyboard, I would say mouse, but we've dropped it on the floor, mouse, but also the one and the only PC-centric mouse mat. If you want to grab one of these, check it out with the link down below. When they are gone, and you'll be sad. But here's the moment of truth. Power switch, obviously make sure that's on. Graphics card actually gets plugged into the HDMI, not the motherboard. Power, and we have some RGB lighting, which is definitely nice to see from the case. It costs around about £40. It's not too loud actually. I mean, here's your initial noise test. That's obviously the minimum that you're going to get, but I'm sure once we get gaming, the graphics card will obviously ramp up and make a little bit of noise. So we got lights, but are we actually going to get a signal? It looks like it. It's doing something. Yes, this is what you're after.
Frequencies point to
It
ACE
just basically
chemicals.
says you've
That's
installed
where
the
Scarecrow's
CPU,
producing
and
the
sometimes
toxin.
says like press F1 to continue, or like this, it's just loaded us straight into
Jim,
the BIOS.
I've traced
So
the fear toxin
only
ACE
thing we
chemicals.
need to do is
That's
go
where
over
we'll
where it
find
says
Scarecrow.
XMP profile, hit this button, and then go around speed from the slower 2666 megahertz
Crane
to the
must have
full
bought them
rated
off.
speed of your kit.
Or worse.
So we'll hit
in the area.
yes,
I'll round up
it will
my
then
guys and head
restart,
over.
and assuming
Hold
that
off
it
until I
likes
get
the
there,
memory,
Jim. I'm on my
obviously,
way.
I guess technically term, it supports memory overclocking, but I mean, it's easy to say. If it likes the memory, it will restart and will be pretty much ready to install Windows. And it looks like it. There you go. If you do want to verify this for yourself, you can see the DVR is now set to 3600 megahertz. So all we need to do is grab the USB flash drive for Windows 11. You can make one of these really easily. I've made a full video about it. Type around the corner of your screen that will go through all of the details, how to install it. Long story short, you just follow the instructions of that tool, load it onto the USB drive, and then when you put this in the back of your PC, we hit the restart button, which is very rare. It should then load automatically into the Windows installer. We're looking for a little spinny logo. Yes, there we go. And there we are in Windows. So let me get this all set up, get some games installed, and then we can look at performance. And indeed, fast forward an hour, hour and a half, and here we are all set up and ready to go. And this is the first proper chance really. That was so weird. The parcel tape's just fallen on the floor and it sounded like someone walked in here and there's no one else in the house, so that freaked me out. Anyway, what I was trying to say is that the rig itself, I think it's really visually striking. I think for the money, you're getting a lot. I don't think there's going to be many people disappointed with the way this looks. It's simple, but pretty effective. You can also customize the RGB with this little switch on the toplet. So if you do want to go for like a static color or a different effect, whilst you can't like change it in software and sync it up to anything else, there are quite a lot of options. So actually I think most people will like it. But I will say that it's definitely not loud, but I would say this is kind of like a medium quiet gaming PC, but when it's just idling, not doing anything. So if you pretty much use your gaming PC for just gaming, you wouldn't really notice. But if you're someone that likes to really like when you sit using different noise, then this is definitely going to be a fair bit louder than your standard gaming PC. Obviously, let you sit a bit more on a case and you can get something with better quality sound that you can control, or obviously swap these out for something else. choice is entirely up to you. But let's press on now to the game. And actually the first thing I want to do, that I would do anyway, even if this wasn't like an NVIDIA sponsored video, is to say I'm a big fan actually of the new NVIDIA beta app, because it annoys me as someone that builds loads of different computers on the old version where you had to log in. They've got rid of that now, and you have everything all in one place. The idea is to sort of get away from the together. So you can customize those now. If you want to download things like frame view, which is what we actually use to measure the, like latency and frame rate and stuff, people always ask you can actually just open that directly through the app now. It's not pre-installed, but it's very easy to do so. You can update your drivers as well, similar to how GeForce Experience works. You can also go over to your graphics options. You can sort of customize them here in the same sort of way you would in the original NVIDIA control panel. And if you do also want to like auto-optimize your game, so you're not, it's not that you're not fussed about changing the settings, but if you just want to let NVIDIA take care of it and you'll get the best settings that can be optimized for your personal rig, you can do that. You don't have to worry about it. But that's the new NVIDIA beta app. Let's jump into some Apex. And here we are on the ground, currently running at high settings, 1440p, and our frame rate's not bad actually. We're getting around about 110 to 120 frames a second. The thing that you do want to pay very close attention to is going to be CPU bottlenecking, because I would, if you can, advise speccing up the CPU a little bit higher.
There's a crew of
so
Ace
maybe
Chemicals
like
workers left on site.
Or
They'll be able to help us track down Scarecrow and locate his bomb.
Then you get maybe the 12400F, that's going to give you like a higher frame rate.
If I can access their personnel records, I'll be able to track them.
GPU usage. If that is around about 96, 97%, it means we're not getting any bottlenecking at all. If it drops a little bit below that, then we are at the limit of the CPU. And I think that's where we are at the moment. But whether this really matters, I'm not 100% sure, because if you're trying to save as much money as possible and still get a really good gaming PC and one you can upgrade a little bit later down the line, I mean, I think you're going to be happy with 120, 130 frames a second in Apex Legends. It's a 6-core CPU as well, so it can handle background tasks a whole lot better. And of course, don't forget, we are running this at 1440p, so this isn't even a 1080p machine. We're still running this at what I would describe as the sweet spot for PC gaming. We're going to see if we can improve things a little bit though by turning down the resolution to 1080p, and then some of these settings here, anything really that reduces the CPU load, I'm going to reduce. Turn these down to low, medium, hit apply. And then indeed our frame rate has now massively increased, as we're currently sitting around about 160 to 170 frames a second. And this is what PC gaming is all about. It gives you that flexibility to choose the settings that you want, get the refresh rate that you want, because ultimately if you're playing on like a budget 1080p monitor or something like that, or anything really that's running at 60 Hz, it's not really going to make a massive difference. You want all the visual fidelity, but if you're going for like a 1080p 165 Hz monitor, then I'd say this is probably now the sweet spot really, as you're actually able to see all of those frames, which obviously helps with responsiveness, and ultimately can help you be a better multiplayer player. And I also realised, by the way, we haven't done our peel yet.
Data connection active.
Now that was perfect. That was a 10 out of 10. But let's now move on to our second game, some Halo Infinite. And as we did with Apex Legends, we're first running this at 1440p at high settings, as we're physically jumping out the way apparently to avoid that. And the frame rate is pretty decent. I mean, it's not as good as you'll find on Apex, as we're currently getting around about 60 to 80 FPS. But this is still more than enough really for you to play this game, enjoy and be competitive. But I would probably advise turning the settings down ever so slightly, maybe to medium, just to get us nearer the 100 FPS mark if you're sort of wanting to play as competitively as possible. Moving across to 1080p resolution in a slightly bigger and more intense map, this is Big Team Battle. You can see that our frame rate has increased, but it's not like a crazy difference, as we're now getting around about 90 frames a second rather than the sort of 75, 80 we were getting before. This kind of solidifies what I was saying about it's like where and when you are in the game necessarily. Like you obviously always get highs and sometimes you get lows. But overall it's definitely a very capable system, and Halo is one of the more difficult multiplayer games to run if you're running at high. I mean, let's have a look what happens if we turn this down to medium actually. If we want to maximise FPS, we go to medium. Has that made a drastic difference? I mean, it's definitely boosted it a little bit. Maybe we've got an extra 5 to 10 frames a second.
I can release the bat scanner and search
about
for the
107. So it definitely is worth having a play around to see what the right balance is for you. Everyone's tastes are going to be slightly differently. But if it was me personally, in a multiplayer game, I'd always be aiming for 100 frames a second. So I'd say 1080p medium is probably going to be your best bet. Moving across to game number 3 though, it's the classic NVIDIA title. This is some Cyberpunk 2077. And what you're seeing here is pretty much going to be our baseline best case scenario, because this is running at high settings, so you could turn it down a little bit more if you want. But high, not ultra, with ray tracing disabled, DLSS super resolution set to balance, and this is also using DLSS 3 frame generation. So like we said earlier, what happens is essentially the GPU renders one frame, then AI adds a frame in between, and then there's another rendered frame. So you get a lot extra smoothness, but it does have a slight latency penalty. And essentially my cheat sheet is, if you can aim for 55 milliseconds or less, you're not really going to notice a difference whatsoever compared to having it off. If you're going to start to creep over 55, maybe 55 to 65, it's going to be noticeable, but like it doesn't matter massively. And then anything over that, you're going to start to really feel it, and I would say it's not really worth having on. But if you're ticking into, you know, like 60 milliseconds every now and then, something like that, that's going to be absolutely fine. But if you do want to have some rays traced, then you can of course go into the settings and find where it says ray tracing. And as you can see, the frame rate is still pretty much sky high, around about 115, 120 FPS. But going off my latency figures, you definitely can now notice that you're in the realms of, what's that, about 70 to 75 milliseconds. So you are not feeling quite as responsive as you were before. I mean, to be fair, this actually doesn't feel too bad. I'm surprised. I have a feeling, because I had like a dodgy recording a second ago, that the latency might actually be lower than it says. I'm not sure if there's something weird going on with the recording or whatever. But this is definitely worth having a play around, experimenting with, to get your sort of dream settings. I mean, just to show you what happens if we turn frame gen off, the latency will go down, but our frame rate will decrease. So
there
what's
are 5
that?
ID
now got
markers
around
showing
about
up within the facility.
65 to 70 frames a second, but then our latency is now about 55 milliseconds. So that's pretty much the sweet spot if you don't want to use DLSS 3, to be honest, but you still want the ray tracing, or I'd probably have ray tracing off and use DLSS 3 frame gen if you want the highest frame rate possible. But the sweet spot is going to vary depending on how you want to play, essentially. But let's now move across to what has to be one of the most visually stunning games I think I've ever tested. And I've played this a little bit on the PlayStation, but this has just come to PC. This is Horizon Forbidden West. And as you can see, it is an absolutely jaw-dropping game. This looks absolutely incredible. It's worth noting as well, this isn't even a racing title, right? So what you're seeing here is just impressive all round without having like any like fancy lighting effects and things going on. In terms of our frame rate, it is definitely the lowest that we've seen straight out the gate today. This is 1440p though, with DLSS set to balance, so we're getting around about 50 frames a second or so. I would probably advise turning this down a little bit. So let's see if we can go and change our presets to medium.
That wall.
I
need to get the Batmobile into the compound.
4, but other than that, we'll keep it exactly how it is. And then yeah, sure enough, now we're getting around about 60 frames a second, and that's pretty much what you're after. If you can hit a minimum of 60 FPS, you're going to get a really nice, all-round smooth gameplay experience. But this does actually have dynamic resolution scaling and things like that, so if you do want to maintain it constant 60, it's not actually as difficult as you might think, as long as you've got the horsepower that we do have here from our 1460. And it is also nice to see that it doesn't look like we're getting any CPU bottlenecking in this one. And of course, as you'd expect, you can also turn this down to 1080p, and we are yielding an even higher frame rate here. And yes, at 1080p our frame rate increases to around about 75 frames a second or so. So yeah, if you want to play Horizon and you don't want to do it on the PlayStation, clearly this is a fantastic way to do it. And I'm now afraid that you're going to have to put up with me, Future Markers, because I realised there was a little bit of an error when we were doing our Horizon testing last time out. I'm not entirely sure what's caused it. I think it was the activation